Hello, everyone. Welcome to our noontime, if you're on the East Coast, session of CME Palooza. Bring up the slides. So this is one of our second gold-sponsored session, which is sponsored by Genentech. We give them a big thank you for that. Connecting clinicians to content that matters. We'll have two presenters today, Jean Ruggiero, Associate Director, Medical Affairs at Genentech, and Nancy Painter, Advisor and Board Member for the Alliance. But before we get to that, of course, the reading of our sponsors. Our gold sponsors, as we already mentioned, Genentech and ACHL, who had the first session today. Our silver sponsors, ASIM, EthosCE, Forefront Collaborative, Integrity Continuing Education, Medscape Education, and Peer Audience. I should have had you read these, John. Next slide, bronze sponsors. Answers in CME, Antidote Education Company, Catamount Medical Education, Clinical Care Options, CMEology, CME Outfitters, Creative Educational Concepts, Evolve Medical Education, and Global Education Group. And the last slide, Helio Education Lab, Impact Education, Infograph Ed, Paradigm, Postgraduate Institute for Medicine, PriMed, Primary Care Network, RedMed Ed, ArmyI, and last but not least, Vindico Medical Education. As always, there's three ways that you can ask questions. We've been getting good questions so far, so hopeful that you guys will really be able to interact and ask us some questions. You can do it using the Google Slides link, which is right on the live page, so right above the video that you're watching. There's a little link there. There's one for my name, so make sure you click on that. You can also use our CME Palooza text line, which seems to be the most popular way, 267-6660-CME. And you can also tweet your question using the CME Palooza hashtag. And I'll be monitoring all of those different ways, so you can submit whichever you're most comfortable with. And lastly, our speaker disclosure slide. Just bear in mind that opinions, discussions, and/or conclusions expressed are our own, and they do not represent an endorsement by or a position of our employer, its parent company, or affiliates. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to John.
Thank you so much, Derek. So first of all, I want to thank you and Scott again for putting together what seems to be a really successful CME Palooza event. Really
Thank you.
a way to demonstrate innovation and learning and change and options for many different types of learning types, if you will, to really absorb the information that's being shared with them. And many of you likely know that I spent the past several months on medical leave, and I'm officially ending that now and entering or re entering back into the industry very slowly, but very steadily. Really excited to be part of this conversation with you and also with the other colleague of mine who's on the panel today, which I'll get to in one moment. I come to you today as someone who has helped lead strategy, not only on the provider side, but also on the supporter side for almost 9 years, unbelievably, within Genentech, my current employer, but also as somebody who's really had the experience as a scientifically trained learning professional with an active membership in the Alliance community and its subset IACE section. And we thought it best to actually spend the next 45 minutes or so just posing questions to a seasoned medical education professional and industry leader to share a perspective on why now is the time for medical education to take the limelight and become the fuel, if you will, of healthcare needs, make a difference in the lives of patients. And so I did some homework. I browsed through the sessions of the agenda for today, joined some of the sessions this morning, actually all of the sessions this morning, and plan to join some of the sessions this afternoon. And it looks to me, at least, as if presenters are aiming to address impact, impact on people in the industry, whether it's impact on providers, on supporters, the impact of accreditation, the impact of CME in general. That just seems to be a common theme with many of the discussions being had today. And therefore, we would like to leverage this common theme and ask you to consider what is said here as you listen to others and continue your dialogue in the community. So this is why we want to discuss how we are all continuing this impact by asking questions around what might we truly need to have in order to connect clinicians to healthcare issues that matter today. So now I'm really honored to be joined by Nancy Painter, whose last day with Genentech is actually officially today, or may have been yesterday. Many are aware that Nancy, after a 20-year career in industry leadership, made the decision to pursue an opportunity to work within the community to advance the science of adaptive learning. And today we continue that conversation, a conversation that reflects our positions more, less of the companies that we currently or formerly served, but more as positions within the alliance, as learning and research community members. Our perspectives do not necessarily reflect the specific position of our companies, like Derek said, but this perspectives shared today will have a two-goal purpose. And maybe, Derek, if you want to go ahead and put up the objective slide, that would be great, just so the audience can see that as I read it. We really aim to discuss how our community can deliver practice-changing medical education to the market, and then also identify scientific insights that are cornerstone to building out a new educational experience. So you've heard me speak enough, and now I'd like to turn it over to Nancy by asking her a question. We will have certain times throughout this conversation where we may ask you some questions as well, and your insight will be incredibly helpful for us to continue the dialogue. So please be open to the opportunity if we ask that. So Nancy, you've been provided the gift of experience over years of healthcare decision-making prior to and during healthcare reform in the United States. And you've been trying to leverage your reflection in terms of the impact it has on the work we do in our learning community. In all of your years in pharma as a supporter, and prior to being a supporter, but still a pharma employee, and overseeing medical education most recently for the purposes of clinical integration, what specific takeaways might you want to share with this community that you think are really important for us to reflect on?
Well, thank you, John. And first of all, welcome back. It's so great to see your happy face.
Thank you. Thank you. My advice for the community, look both sides of the street before crossing it. You'll have a year's worth of difficulties and challenging surgery.
Oh, well, so glad to have you back. And maybe, you know, one of the saddest things about moving outside of Genentech is I don't get to work with you every day. But that being said, happy to be here today, and really have, if my words today are at all helpful, that is wonderful. And my intention today is just to share some perspective from one person that's been in the trenches with a lot of experience in the past and the commercial side of really understanding how you advance a movement and how you advance traction of the use of resources in medical practice. And then also just quite frankly, a deep respect and passion for the medical stakeholders, or the stakeholders in the medical education arena. The last 2 years in particular, I've been super jazzed by what I am seeing in terms of some of the innovations that providers in particular have been bringing to the market. And I'll get to that in a minute, but maybe the first inflection point I would share is really representing the pharmaceutical industry. I think we have an obvious focus on developing, discovering best-in-class science. And that science, our mission is really to impact, to your word, patient lives. But patient lives can't be impacted with these amazing scientific discoveries if core decision makers, like a physician, like any clinician, if they just don't understand the science. And obviously that's been the underpinnings of medical education to date. Just if we could just get folks to know the science through osmosis, it would get into practice. And, you know, going back to the 60s, right, that was a core need. Is there a formalized, systematic way that we can ensure that clinicians stay up on the latest scientific advances and make sure there's no bias, and where you can really appreciate the origins of the CME industry? And it's just been interesting, you know, key points that we were kind of thinking about is as supporters, and I don't mean to bias this with a pharmaceutical lens, but critical to get understanding out there of the evidence that matters to patients. And, that continues to be a top priority, not for the purposes of marketing a product, but just ensuring broad-based and fair and balanced scientific discourse. But despite that being critically important, not only to pharma companies with the discoveries, but health systems trying to make sure their physicians are making the best decisions, there's been profound investment, billions of dollars invested in generating performance data on what is or is not happening with the physician's decision, if you will. But there's limited progress in a physician's ability to take in information, to know something, and then to really think through, how could this information specifically help my patient, the patients I actually see. And I would just emphasize that the ongoing need for evidence understanding is core to many of the major stakeholders in healthcare and healthcare systems, in pharma in particular. It's profoundly challenging for clinicians to keep up. It's not possible, right? So there's going to be an ongoing need for folks to just know for educational interventions. They're more overwhelmed than ever. And with that, I would just say my one pause would be, I was thinking about some of the innovations specifically. Like, there's tons of need for evidence transfer. It's massively overwhelming for the physicians to keep up. There's been really great and promising innovations from the medical education community. I'm looking at my notes. Like, it's all awesome to see clinical care options, partnership with a Flatiron data set, and really thinking through a new oncology educational product that is targeted towards gaps in care for oncologists. Or incredible to see Prime's work on the shared decision-making connection of medical education to a shared encounter in bladder cancer, publications that came out of there with, North Shore, or looking at, most recently at point of care and their work in connecting physicians and medical education to prepare for a shared decision-making encounter, like that getting produced at ECTRIMS. We see great promise in those early pioneers in medical education. So I'm rambling a little bit, but I would just say I am particularly struck by flipping the question and thinking through, of the most innovative solutions that more effectively take everything in med-ed that we know that works and get it one step closer to truly helping a physician make a decision for a specific patient. What would that look like if you took all the power and magic of a medical education ideal experience? What will it take to truly turn that into, on a regular basis, practice-changing educational experiences? And that's a little bit what I've been obsessed about right now.
Yeah, Nancy, let me interrupt you for one moment. And you had suggested that one of the main points that we need to hear are clinicians are overwhelmed. They continue to be overwhelmed. And, I think perhaps, Derek, I may have created something on the fly for you to flash up on screen, some key points that Nancy just addressed. Perhaps you could share that. And Nancy, just for clarifying purposes, you had suggested that you believe that clinicians are more overwhelmed than ever with administrative tasks, and they see getting back to their calling. I wonder if you consider that one of those administrative tasks are education as well, the requirements of taking education, completing education, and does that tie into the need to be more innovative, perhaps?
I think it offers an opportunity, not so much that education is administrative, if you will, but quite frankly, the physicians are, their job every day often entails a lot of administrative processes that may preclude an ability to actively engage in an educational resource that would actually help them, right? I think maybe as we get later into the conversation today, we could talk about what would it look like if a data-powered educational experience automatically, was enabled for physicians so that they think about credits. That was just a factor of the design, but I'm jumping way ahead of myself. But I think maybe one of the core points, John, is, as we imagine this, one of the core limitations that we've kind of seen as supporters has been the initial programs that offer promise at point of care, CCO, Prime. There's many. I don't mean to exclude any there because I'm thinking of Matt Freeze. Matt, we love you. So there's many, many great ideas. And I think one of the challenges has been, but how do we do that at scale? And how do you do it every single time? I think to the point of your question about is it an administrative burden, maybe one of the ways we could think about how would you make a more modern medical education experience possible for all learners. I think instead of thinking about a program that we design and push in, I think it could be really interesting to think about the Clay Christensen at Harvard concept of jobs, and to really have something take off, the initial innovation take off, and physicians readily leverage resources that we're providing to them to make their life better. Thinking about how could we make a physician's job easier, right? Education not as a one-off at the end of the year when you're thinking about getting your 20 credits, not as an experience that your administrators in a health system are making you go through with a stick to drive a performance goal, but more so just taking a step back and talking to physicians in the last couple of months. Like, what do you actually think about? And maybe just on that for a second, the physicians that we've encountered or talked to that have gone through the programs we have supported love the content, love the deep content, the problem-based learning. Many of the educational design considerations that our leading providers are thinking about. I think the aha moment is, despite all of that, hey, I'm a physician. I'm really busy.
Right.
And I think over the course of the day, wow, what educational gap do I have? My driving force every day when I show up is, how do I deliver the best care to my patient?
Yeah, because that's what I was trained to do.
That's what I was trained to do. So my job is to deliver the best care to my patient. A cornerstone to that, and we could do a lot of market research surveys on, to deliver the best job, it necessitates understanding the best science. Not only understanding it, because that's really not enough, and quite frankly, my observation, that's much of the education we have supported, and that's an awesome starting point. But if the science is not tailored or made relevant to the specific patients that a physician sees, in some way the education is designed to be applied for the patients that the physician sees, it's not going to be used. It's not going to be used to the power that a educational experience can really provide for a physician. It has to fit the job, has to be designed for, I'm supporting you as you deliver best in class science, best in class practice decisions to patients.
This
So
is awesome, because this is a great segue into where I was going to take us next. But I thought maybe, Nancy, if it was okay with you, I'd like to pause for a moment and maybe turn it back or turn it over to the audience and just ask them a question that Derek is going to help us manage. And Derek, I think it probably would be best to maybe rely on using the text option for audience. And if you need to help us understand, please interject. My question to all of you was simply going to be based on your years of experience, like the years that Nancy has given into this industry, but your years of experience, are there one or two or three words that you think are key to describing what you think are the perspectives of where we are today? Something that perhaps we did not discuss, but something that perhaps we all should be discussing. We'd like to collect those insights from you and see whether or not there's something that we can address today in that perspective that you share.
And I'm going to throw up the number on here so everyone can see. 267-6660 CME. and I'll go back
And
to the
Derek,
question.
if you would help us by perhaps reading just a couple of options that come through, as long as people are kind.
I will when they do. We'll give them a couple of minutes. In the meantime, if you don't mind, we did get a question via Twitter. If you're interested in that at this point, I can give that to you. The question is, I think it relates, but if you want to save it for later, that's fine. How do you get an overwhelmed clinician to buy into shared decision making, which maybe to them will be seen as one more loss of control?
It's a great question. I have a perspective to share, but I also want to respect that I invited Nancy to be an expert panel member to provide perspective. So why don't we start with you, Nancy, and then maybe I can add on to that perspective.
Great. I think the question is spot on, and it's a question that we experienced firsthand in some of our direct research collaborations in my past employer. Jumping right to the shared encounter and really thinking about some of the innovative grants focused on shared decision making. It's a really heavy lift to gain buy-in from the clinical teams to want to be part of that. And I really commend all the providers that took that challenge and slogged to get the clinicians to come to the table to want to be part of that decision. Maybe a pause there. I think some of the core success factors that led to the physicians wanting to be part of the shared decision making was really anchoring them to why hearing the perspective mattered and what it could mean for the physician in delivering best-in-class care. But it was a very purposeful, conscious priming effort that preceded the shared encounter itself, if you will, to just remind them, prime them, and let them know that actively engaging in a shared encounter not only was in their best interest, but what it meant to delivering on their job, the promise of delivering the best-in-class care. So we could have a whole conversation, a different CME Palooza talk about how would you actually design that pre-encounter.
Yeah.
Or maybe the other point I would just say, and it's an observation after the fact, we're not all going to be able to develop CME-powered shared decision-making at scale. If every experiment costs $250,000 and takes 6 months to slog it out and get 25 physicians to want to be part of this, like that's a heavy lift, and it's worth it when you're doing proof of concept. But how do we think through what are the core steps so that all providers, all designers in the CME space could replicate what's working in these heavier encounters? And I think the one observation I will just share, and it's something I've been really playing around with, if a clinician is not confident in knowing any kind of question that patient may have, and often anchored to the best science, what is the evidence today for my adjuvant breast cancer situation that's going to prevent recurrence? If I'm not knowing cold the 3 or 4 core scientific evidentiary considerations that affect that patient-specific decision, I am really not going to be emotionally ready to have a shared encounter because it's a subconscious bias and I'm going to avoid it. So I think there is interesting opportunity to maybe chunk down decision-making CME, to think about more in purposeful chunks of what would it take to empower a physician through innovative CME design to prime them, to get them ready for a shared encounter. And how can I go through the latest science, not all the science, not everything ASCO has to say about breast cancer, but just to make it more manageable, only for the likely evidence that you likely see in your practice. This is what you should really track. And this is likely what your patients are going to talk about, or this is likely what, and just starting and over solving it, I realize. But the takeaway is, to Derek's question, if we jump in right away in the deep end, expecting clinicians are going to show up en masse to do SDM, right, and they're taking more autonomy. If you prime them and really ground them as the coach and the scientific leader and play to the job they do, I'm supposed to be the clinical expert. If we design education to fit that job, I would anticipate, and we saw this at health systems, you take the edge off of any power struggles on autonomy.
I agree, Nancy. The perspective that I was going to share was going to be so key to what you just said. I mean, based on my experience in independent medical education and observing things that have been supported, but also based on my experience in direct collaborative research work with health systems, especially most recently in the past couple of years, what really was successful in getting physicians really bought into the shared decision-making process was understanding from the get-go that physicians and patients had to be activated first around the principles of why there was going to even be a shared decision-making encounter. And then from there, the shared decision-making conversation was going to be led by, we were empowering the physician to lead that conversation, if you will, especially when making really difficult decisions and choices and diagnoses for patients that may not be equipped yet to be part of a shared decision-making encounter. It really drove the passion of the physicians to understand that they were part of a collective and that they were actually driving the decision, that they were improving their likelihood of success as well as what they were passionate about, again, as a physician, by being part of that conversation and leading it. And so that's, to your point, I think we could have a whole separate CME Palooza section on that. But I think it was a great question that really empowers us to move on into the next topic.
I have some words if you're ready.
Would you give us some?
Yeah, we got a couple responses, about 4 responses.
I'm going to ask you to see if you would like to reflect on some of these as well. But go ahead.
Okay, so we have evolved, we have evolving. Where's the other one? Oh, actionable education.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, babble.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, smiley face emoticon.
Yep.
I'm not sure what that. That is more than 1 to 2 words. We are in a crowded field, all fighting for attention for the education we are developing and trying to deliver. It's more than 3 words, but
crowded competition. I'm going to take babble as a positive remark, meaning like we're all learning a new language or something like that.
Exactly.
Instead of babbling. But that's okay. That's okay. Nancy, just reflecting on some of the things that were said from you in the beginning of the conversation, some of the things that we just said now about shared decision making, and maybe some words like evolved, actionable education, babbling, or crowded competition, or just really trying to make our place in the marketplace that's constantly changing, constantly evolving. Do you have any other perspective to share?
Yeah, and I could really appreciate the sense of competition. On that point, I would just emphasize that there's no lack of need to get evidence into practice. So it's only going to get, the market opportunity is only going to get greater as physicians face the need to translate evidence into practice. So I think that there's enough business for everyone. That would be the least of my problems. I think with respect to your choice, babble, and I really respect that. Could be my presentation style. That's completely fair. But
so actually, if I can clarify, we do receive a clarifying text. It's babble as in Tower of Babel, not babble as in babbling.
That is a good clarification.
Okay, fantastic. I'm going to have to do my historical references there. But I do think this is an important point. I recognize that I come from more of a commercial background, despite 12 plus years running a med ed team and a clinical integration team. Our industry's ability to get comfortable with more of the needs of physicians and health systems from a business perspective will only help us redefine education, not as a program, but as an experience that is critical, pivotal, measurable to the goals that a health system has, that a group practice has. So the babble, I think, actually relates, and it's just a call to all of us stepping into what is the business environment today that could, that I could step boldly into and innovating in a very stepwise way to reposition the value of CME, something that right now it's in a box. People think it's a one-off thing. How do I redefine that from a market perspective that will necessitate a redesign, that will necessitate me thinking about my business differently, so that it becomes part of a regular experience. So that when physicians are saying, it's not so much that I'm not going to design a product right now, but it's a design to ensure they understand the science that matters to the patient. This is how I'm going to learn it, deliver it, and being reinforced by it. And now that's a whole separate conversation about product design. But I do think getting comfortable about how physicians make clinical decisions alone and then in practice with a patient, mapping that out from a business perspective in terms of a care episode, an episode of care, a care journey, however, whatever words or babbles people associate, I think a critical step and opportunity for the CME industry is to take a step back and look, what is this value really delivering? And over time, it's likely not going to be the December push for credits or optimizing marketing messages at Adelaide at ASCO. It's like the market expansion of significance for all CME players is, how do I think about the broader experience I can step into? Jen, just a couple little points in terms of like, just maybe we can jump into what would a modern medical education experience look like?
That's great. Let's go there.
And it's really about how do I inform, affect, improve clinical decision making. It's not how do I get smarter? How do I know? No. If we reframe the question, how do I understand, inform, enable more patient-centered decisions that will change over the course of the care journey? It gives you a different starting point.
Yeah.
And I think some of the core attributes that we were thinking about is, you know,
may I interject for 1 second too? As you think about the core attributes for a modern medical education experience, two things. Derek, first of all, I think I have a slide on this that may
great.
summarize some of the points that Nancy's about to make. And then secondly, Nancy, if you could think about what should our community make of the word modern? I mean, modern is a broadly used term, and that would be really helpful to understand your perspective as you go through this. What is the modern medical education experience? Why is it so relevant for us today?
Yeah. So we pulled the slide up. We already talked about rethinking and reimagining education as part of the physician's job to understand and apply science in their clinical decision-making process. So that's a shift of how we think about what we're developing. There's a whole conversation then about what are the implications for needs assessments and educational objectives. Likely there's a significant opportunity for redefining that, and we have a roadmap of how we would redefine educational programming structures based on what CMS, basically signaled in November of 17 with their macro roadmap for the improvement activities for CMS, right? And that's already out there. Must address quality safety gap. Activity has to have specific measurable aims. I'm sure Tom and Andy reiterated these this morning. But of the 5 core tenets of where Medicare, a national arbiter of where the power of MedEd could go, and their provision of an initial roadmap for us, I love looking at the activity must include interventions that are intended to result in improvement. All right, so that's really obvious, intended to drive results in improvement. With just the slight starting point of my needs assessment, starting with what am I trying to improve, right? Not what I'm trying to know, but what am I trying to improve? I think a modern educational improvement is going to have to be data powered in some way, or at least shown to be to have relevance to the patients that the physician actually treats. I'm going to be educated on a specific topic because I'm going to make a decision that will lead to an improvement for the specific patients that I'm going to see. So you're going to have to design the education, obviously around the improvement goal you have, but
probably so many conversations that could stem from just even the topic of data power.
Yeah,
what that means and how to make that even more relevant.
And data powered, I know that has been a great conversation we've had with many providers and some of the innovative examples. I really respect how hard that could be if the understanding is data-powered CME means full integration with Epic EHR or full integration with the Flatiron data set. I think it would be helpful for the educational community to kind of think through stepwise. What does it really mean from CMS to be, they're not saying it, they're saying that you do have to collect data, but there's a lot of different ways to think about data. Are there stepwise, lowbrow ways to have the physician have self-attestation of what their improvement goals are and what their patient mix is? And they could then de facto have a more, quite frankly, qualitative assessment, qualitative data on their improvements starting point. But I think we need to give ourselves.
And that is what CMS is requiring, at least within this first year. So what you said makes a lot of sense.
So how do we get super creative to take educational design expertise that we have to flip the question of like, well, how would we have a data-powered med ed that allows me to tailor the educational experience so that it's relevant for the patients that I see? I think that we could get really creative and do kind of the poor man's version for an entree point of qualitatively coming up with the data to meet the CMS criteria and have proof of concept so that over time, you know, it's not realistic that anything that touches a physician's daily life does not touch data in the next 5 years, the next 3 years. I don't think anyone's going to have the bandwidth to do something that's not data powered because technology is going to take the space there. But I think we have time. So we talk, you know, so underlying doing, designing med ed for the job that they're doing, designing it as an experience at a program, being relevant, like, so the education that comes up, it's not everything. It's not me searching a toolbar for the topics that I may need. It's automatically creating relevance and tailoring the educational offering to specifically likely improvement goals, decisions that you're struggling with. And then I think the last thing I'll just leave with is I think increasing our digital literacy as a CME provider community, the solutions forward will increasingly be all digital. We already see that there's many offerings where we have a lot of incredible websites, mobile advances, but truly moving forward, how do we look at emerging technologies in the digital space? They go well beyond repositories on a website and well beyond just the repository then fitting on a handheld. I think there's a discussion there about how we can leverage technology that would really create you know, an amazing user experience for a physician that again is looking to know the science and not looking to step out of life and become educated.
Yeah, that is really an important point, Nancy, because so many of the required measures, whether you're coming from an accountable care organization or you're following, you're in an institution that is following the oncology care model, or just following MIPS in general, there's so many required federal measures now that speak to using technology, innovative technology, as the step forward for creating a solution for that measure. So I think it's really important that you mentioned that. I am going to pause for a moment and turn this over to the audience. And while we collect the responses, I am going to ask you something for clarity, Nancy, because I think it's really important. It's something that I hear you say a lot. But first, let's go ahead to the slide of the question, Derek, if you don't mind. And this question really is, again, using the text capability that CME Palooza has made available to us. What 1 to 2 words, perhaps not already used? You can use 3 if you'd like to use 3. But what words, maybe not already used, do you think reflect ways to bring medical education forward to meet today's demands? Maybe your version of modern medical education, your version of modern medical education. We'll wait a moment or two to just go ahead and collect those responses. But Nancy, one of the things that I've heard you say quite a bit, even before the CME Palooza event today, it just seems to be part of your culture and your way of operating in this industry, is that clinicians, and one of the greatest challenges is that they don't know what they don't know. And in addition to not knowing what they don't know, we're all looking for North Stars, if you will, to address that specific gap. How does this fit into the idea of the modern medical education experience? How do we correct this need to address clinicians not knowing what they don't know?
So I'm trying to think through how to break down that problem.
I think you answered part of it by talking about this care delivery experience and rooting the education in the actual job that the physician has to take on every single day. Is there more that you want to add to that?
You know, I think that that's just a great starting point of how do you activate them, that there is a gap. I mean, I'm looking at you on the screen thinking explicitly about REMI work at MedStar, which is a live version, if you will, of the starting point of how you activate clinicians to understand that there's a problem to be solved. And I think some of the core tenets of that particular innovative educational design was, this is really simplistic perhaps, but looking at the performance data for that health system specifically in lung, and it was the underdiagnosis, specific lung cancer patient type, and taking the clinical teams through the process of, did you see the data? Did you know from a self-efficacy, this is you? And you don't need to be overwhelmed, but let me walk you through how you may want to think about care decisions, treatment considerations, diagnosis considerations for the patients that you're likely to see. And that was kind of the live version, what I would call the intensive, heavy-handed version of what you could then just digitize, right? And if we looked at that model that's been published through the Alliance, I think our CME providers could look at the tenants and then just flip it as, well, what's the minimal step, one of the components of that MedStar example that I could start thinking through to redesign a CME experience that would replicate that more simplistic.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Let's see if Derek has any specific words to share with us.
We do. We have a bunch, actually. I'll go in order. More collaboration. This is more than 2 or 3 words, but creative software for CME developers.
Oh.
Instructional design skills. Formal degree programs. That one just disappeared on me when I did it. Needs assessment. Interactive education simulation. Read the research.
Oh.
I think that is all for now. I have a question came in related to the topic. I can give it to you now, or I can wait until a better time. You want it now? Okay. Let me bring it up. Okay. So what are your thoughts on microburst learning and how this learning principle can be used in CME, especially if a provider is using mobile technology to teach clinicians in microbursts or short increments of 2 to 3 minutes?
Nancy, why don't you take that, but as you take that, see if there's anything in addition to what you'll respond there that you want to add based on some of the comments that people provided, like the need for more collaboration or creating creative software, which may actually tie nicely into the microburst question, or the way for tying in instructional design capabilities, things along those lines. Thoughts?
Yeah, that's great. We'll get to the microburst in a minute. I love that concept, but we'll get to that. You know, I think, to John, your call out on collaboration, I think the path forward is going to take a multitude of stakeholders with different skill sets and experiences that will necessitate ways that we all collaborate together. I love that. I think that that is the only path forward, because when we think about data-powered, relevant, for the job that they're doing in their daily life, not at the end of the year, likely in short bursts, I think that the reality is when we think through what would the ideal collaboration team be, I think, you know, there's a kind of a joke about like who would be in your ideal neighborhood, and mine's always Mark Wahlberg and Will Smith and maybe Oprah. But I think if you thought about like your ideal modern med design neighborhood, you know, I think it would be super to have a partner, and I'm not trying to overwhelm anyone, but someone that has in-depth experience with health or the development of performance dashboards. We as CME providers don't need to recreate PDQR dashboards and what a hospital administrator wants to manage for the 20 cost exposure points. We will never catch up. There's significant work already there. So a pop health dashboard kind of partner. I think, looking obviously for health systems, they're already identified the need, like a MedStar, Intermountain, that they want to engage clinical teams more robustly in this modern educational experience. I think advocacy group partnerships, thinking through over time how we're going to bring patient relevance into the shared encounter. I'm saying obvious things, I'm just calling them providers with incredibly strong medical content and a depth of your instructional design, educational design, outcomes expertise that can build on that and maybe blow up the needs assessment educational design process a little bit more in alignment with where we're going. The last two I would just say is we're gonna need product designers in addition to tech-oriented technology partners, because we're gonna have to be redesigning the actual user interface to reflect the job, the experience that we want this data-powered education to deliver for the physician. It's not realistic to not have someone with strong product design expertise, nor is it realistic if we don't have folks that understand how to develop the subsequent data tables, leverage technology to think through over time how you're going to feed different kinds of data that's like tagged domains or topics of meta content, tagged to performance gaps, tagged to patient preferences. To a certain extent, again, not to overwhelm our CME leaders, but I don't think it's realistic to not have those kind of expertise. And then the last thing is just pharmaceutical partners that may be interested, obviously, in the tenets of independent evidence educational products, but I think more so those more forward-thinking pharma partners that really think of education as supporting a clinical decision-making process. And when we put data behind that, the CME will generate data not only to help a physician get CMS credit, but it will inform pharma on what are the drivers of an involving clinical decision-making process. What drives a decision? How those drivers of the decision impact its specific clinical outcomes. The more we have data powering the upfront modern med-ed experience, the more we have data around that, there is much more leverage and opportunity for CME providers to make their programs better and better and tailored over time. But quite frankly, to partner more closely with partners that are trying to understand how clinical decision-making is changing in this shift towards value and patient-driven value.
I agree, Nancy. And just for the matter of time, we have about 5 minutes left, and I don't mean to glance over the microburst conversation, but you actually started to transition really nicely into what I was going to ask you. Just very simply, I mean, you have such a good spirit about trying not to overwhelm all the learners today, as well as just the broader industry. So just very basically, are there any tips on how we start to make this more modern educational experience a reality beyond what you've already shared?
I think fostering discussion, and, if there were an opportunity to even take the folks that are on the line today to kind of think through, maybe, creating a blog or creating some forum where the folks that are really committed to innovating and thinking through what are the core components of modern medical education, what's realistic, short-term versus longer-term, having honest conversations about what our true strengths are, identification of partners. I think the more we just foster conversation about that, whether it's at the January Alliance meeting, and I love Derek and Scott in terms of making these kind of conversations accessible. I love if there's a group of people that are already thinking. So just fostering forums, blogs, discussion about what this could mean, and just jumping into it, not overbaking it, not a 10-domain QICME roadmap, right? Just really just having real conversations about how we can get just proof of concepts out there and try some new things and get more consistency across our industry of what the likely roadmap is for how the CME leaders help redefine where clinical decision making is going for physicians.
Summary-wise, from you throughout these last 45, 50 minutes, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going to do the best I can here, Nancy. We heard a lot about data power. Also sounds like a new superhero talent, if you will, and something that I'm sure that many people in our industry would like to gravitate toward. Sometimes I wonder if what is actually meant by data powered is at least the relevancy of medical education and care decisions, the data power that brings forth the care decisions. So do we bridge the needing to factor into patient preferences in some way? There's a modern medical education experience that requires us to be to make things more relevant and more efficient, perhaps maybe to the microburst comment. For those who are the recipients of the educational experience, there's a need to change the educational product into a educational experience to get learners bought into the process. And what is truly personalized care encounters, those are the core tenets of what must be happening in order to support the future of medical education as a shared encounter experience. So any thoughts on my summaries, any clarifications that may be needed?
No, I think you're spot on. I mean, I think if there was only one message I would say, the more we design education with intent to affect practice change, it's not a sexy word the CMS is saying, try this. I think we go all in and think about program design, measurement, needs assessment, that the programming should only be designed for the intention of a practice change. And if that's our strategy, we're not going to be chasing down data. We're not going to be spending excessive times proving outcomes results to pharma supporters. If you just design it for the intention that it has to affect a decision, everything else will come. And I that seems really obvious, but I would say 90% of what we funded was not designed for that. We backdoored it, but I think there's significant opportunities with that one slight.
I really like that as a marketing message from the conversation that we had today. Let me see, Derek, do you have any questions that came from the audience? Maybe time for one question.
No, I think I actually pretty much covered everything that came in during the session itself, so I don't have any additional after that.
Well, I appreciate that. Let me use this last minute or two then to end this session by first thanking you for sticking with us and hearing this conversation, interacting with the questions that were asked, providing comments and clarifications to those comments, really helpful. Nancy, I love the idea of perhaps creating a blog, and I commit to you to helping you either surface that or to work with the Alliance and maybe my co-chair Susan and the IA subcommittee to empower that somehow to actually take place. I really do think that continued conversations about the future of education to provide more value to the learner is absolutely necessary. And people within our community are so passionate about that. I wanted to thank Derek and Scott again for creating this forum for us to be able to share these insights. And last but not least, Nancy, I do have to say, and I know that you coached me not to do this, but I think I do have to say that after 20 years of service within pharma, leading educational departments, as a board member of the Alliance, as a continued board member of the Alliance, as an advisor, so many people have been seeking your input on how to do what you just talked about today. I just, on behalf of my team at Genentech, as well as just the community in general, the broader community today who may be listening, want to thank you for your years of service and providing the insights that you've provided throughout those years. So thank you so much for everything you've taught me and everything you've taught everybody else.
You're too kind. You're too kind. I'm just, if folks take a few kernels out of today, that's great. Great to be on the other side where I can design a little bit more, and happy to be a resource. Very excited about thinking about the blog, maybe even something, Derek, we could do through you and Scott, and just augment what you're already doing. But thank you so much.
Absolutely. Derek, so we turn this back over to you, and we thank you for the time.
Yes. Oh, well, and thank both of you too. I was actually just texting a little bit with Scott during this and saying we've gotten more questions today and with your session as well than I think we have for any of our CME Palooza days. So I can always tell when everyone's engaged. And so we had great responses. So thank you to everyone who's been participating. Thank you both, John and Nancy, as well. Great session. Let me do my wrap-up slides here real quick so Scott can take it over. If you have a moment, please take our survey if you haven't already done so. It's right on our live page where you're watching this video. It will take you 30 seconds to do it, and it is very helpful for us. And lastly, next session coming up at the top of the hour at 1 o'clock is accreditation potpourri with a whole lot of really smart people on here, much smarter than myself, and especially Scott. And then on that note, and just to watch the session, just refresh your screen and the next video feed will come up. And I think that is it. So John and Nancy, again, thank you very much. And we'll look forward to talking to you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.